Hoje, dois áudios legendados e inéditos de militares que participaram do projeto Blue Book, projeto Livro Azul, depois da vinheta. Olá pessoal, eu sou o Edson Boaventura Júnior, sejam bem-vindos ao canal Enigmas e Mistérios e hoje a gente está com dois áudios inéditos, legendados aí, de participações, entrevistas que militares do projeto Blue Book participaram no ano de 1960. Uma das entrevistas foi feita no dia 4 de dezembro de 1960 para um programa de rádio. Este programa de rádio chamava Monitor. A outra entrevista, que inclusive é um debate bem acirrado, bem quente, com outro pesquisador de renome, aconteceu no dia 5 de dezembro de 1960, num talk show que chamava The Dave Garroway Show. Neste programa do Dave, participaram num debate acirrado ali o Coronel Tucker, que era do projeto Blue Book, e também o Major Donald K. Roy, que é bem conhecido, escreveu vários livros de ufologia e participou da NICAP, que é um grupo ufológico norte-americano bem interessante. E eles chegam quase a se degladiar no programa, então tá imperdível esses dois áudios aí desses dois programas, um que veio ao ar no dia 4 de dezembro e outro no dia 5 de dezembro. Eu queria agradecer ao Rodrigo Moura Visoni, que legendou esses áudios aí históricos para nós. Então, sem mais delongas, vamos ver estas interessantes entrevistas.
Well, if anyone didn't recognize that as 76 trombones from the Music Man, go back to the rear of the class. And, of course, it was Robert Preston, the Music Man himself, doing the vocalizing.
Here's an interesting question. Flying saucers, do they exist or don't they? How can some of the sightings of flying saucers be explained? Is anything going on that the public just doesn't know about? Now, these are some of the questions that we have for our next guest, Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence J. Tacker of the United States Air Force, who's written a new book called Flying Saucers in the U.S. Air Force, the official Air Force story. And welcome to Monitor, Colonel Tacker.
Thank you, George.
I assure you, you won't have any problem with flying saucers in Radio Central.
Good. You never know. Colonel Tacker, let's give you the big question right at the start. Do you believe in flying saucers?
Well, that question involves semantics, Mort. Do you mean an unidentified flying object, or do you mean a spaceship?
Well, what do you mean by a flying saucer?
Well, that's the question. If you are asking me if people are seeing things in the heavens, the answer is definitely yes. If you're asking me if they're seeing spaceships, the answer is no.
That's definite.
That's definite, sir.
Very positively stated, anyway. Colonel, I guess it's an unvarnished truth that some people believe the Air Force is withholding information from the public. Now, let's ask you very bluntly, is there any truth to this?
Absolutely not. That's pure rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
The Air Force does not withhold information. In fact, we have a policy to release information on this subject to the public as soon as we have analyzed and evaluated a given sighting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Colonel, does the Air Force deny the possibility of life on other planets? Or, let's put it this way, that we're being watched by intelligent beings from other planets?
Well, if that's one question, Mort, I'd like to answer it in two parts.
Break it up.
All right. The Air Force does not deny the possibility of life on other planets.
Oh?
Actually, the entire scientific community agrees that there could be planets in other galaxies which could support life just like Earth does. However, we do say that we are not being watched by intelligent beings from other planets at this time. That is, we do not have any evidence to date, and by to date I mean right now, that substantiates such a conclusion.
Well, what accounts for these people who say they have seen flying saucers, and so many of them have, saying that they are manned, and some of them say that they have seen sort of people in them or coming out of them.
Well, what we have here, Mort, is, again, a question of semantics on what you call evidence. Most
the
of our
veracity of the
scientific
witness.
community are frustrated
Yeah.
by the evidence that is presented to us by these UFO groups. It won't support any scientific investigation, and actually we just can't come up with an answer and say that flying saucers are spaceships from other planets. They're UFOs, they're unidentified flying objects. I'd like to go into that a little bit further and point out that the United States Air Force, by law, is charged with the air defense of the United States. And that this whole UFO question is just one little part of air defense. By that I mean we're required by law to detect and then go up and identify any unidentified object in the sky or in space to see if it's a threat to the national security.
And these would be considered a threat if they were legitimate visitations from other planets.
Of course they would.
Colonel Tacker, some of these things have been explained adequately, I believe, but aren't there some that still have no explanation at all?
Well, we do have a small percentage which are labeled as unexplained. However, the Air Force does feel that if sufficient information had been given at the initial sighting, that we could have explained them.
Now, I'd like to ask, too, is this official position pretty heartily endorsed by the people who have had contact, or is it an official position as opposed to the private positions that might be taken by people who've had experience in this sort of thing? And by experience, I mean actually participated in sightings. I'm referring to for instance, the 1952 occasion when they claimed to have seen something on radar over the military field opposite National Airport in Washington.
Well, the 1952 sightings in Washington, of course, were caused by a temperature inversion, which is a warm layer of air laying over a cold air layer, which results in a refraction and mirages of both visual sightings, lights at altitude, and on the radar scopes. And in this particular instance, after sifting the information through the scientific criteria, they came up with this answer. Now, the UFO groups, the individual groups, the hobby groups that are investigating these things from time to time disagree, of course, with this particular answer, and they disagree with many of our answers. It's the interpretation of these sightings wherein we're questioned.
Well, we've been taking the word sighting rather generally. I wonder if maybe you could give us an example of one of the most spectacular sightings that's been reported.
Well, of course, the actual contact stories published in books would be the most sensational. But as far as a UFO sighting, which was reported to the Air Force, is concerned, I would say that probably the Pacific sightings of 1959, July 1959, would be the most sensational, in that they involved many airline pilots who were en route from California to Hawaii. And what we got there were many reports by radio from the planes before they landed that they had seen this object going at a fantastic speed. They viewed it from 3 to 5 seconds, and some pilots were alarmed, said it seemed to come straight toward the aircraft and then veer away. Other pilots said, well, it looked like a meteor, except for the fact that it seemed to head toward the aircraft. It proved to be a meteor of the Fireball class.
I see.
Colonel, I'm sure that you go into quite an explanation in your book about flying saucer sightings and your explanation of what most of them have been and are. And it's been a very fascinating conversation here for myself, and I'm sure for George. I know one thing. I want to read that book of yours.
And I want to ask one quick question, Colonel. Do you expect to have further information from the United States Air Force? Is there another study to be released soon?
In the book, we point out that Project Blue Book is a continuing thing, and they are about to compile and release some new statistics which will come out in early 1961.
And we certainly shall be looking forward to those. Very nice to talk to you, Colonel. And we'd like to mention the title of your book, Flying Saucers in the U.S. Air Force, written by Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence J. Tacker of the United States Air Force. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Flying Saucers, the official Air Force story, it says on this book, is out. Flying Saucers in the U.S. Air Force, Colonel Lawrence Tacker. Lieutenant Colonel Tacker will be in, along with Donald Kehoe, who believes very much in flying saucers. Mr. Tacker, I would say, Colonel Tacker doesn't exactly. And we'll have the two of them to say a few words to each other, friendly, I trust. And I may stick my own neck in, too, because I've read the book and I have lots of things to, well, about 400 notes I made in it, so I can't resist them all.
Speaking of optical illusions, like you just were a moment ago with that kooky window over in the corner, I have one right here.
What's that?
What?
Do you believe really that flying saucers do exist or don't?
Well, that's a matter of semantics, Dave. What do you mean by a flying saucer? Do you mean a spaceship?
No. I mean an unidentified flying object, I guess.
Certainly. I believe unidentified flying objects occur and that many solid citizens see them.
What do you think they are?
Well, in most instances, we've been able to explain all of them as either conventional objects under extenuating circumstances or some form of aerial phenomena.
Well, phenomena isn't an object, is it?
No,
we
it's
said
not.
Objects, we said.
All right,
So that would
sir.
rule out phenomena. What
right,
about unidentified objects?
However, it's originally reported as an object.
Well, if it isn't, it's a matter of semantics, as you said.
That's right.
What was the other classification now that you just mentioned? Either phenomena or...
Conventional objects seen under extenuating circumstances. An aircraft, for instance.
I see.
In unusual light conditions.
Right.
Or in a fog or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That opinion was given by Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Tacker, U.S. Air Force spokesman on the question of unidentified flying objects, and author of this just published book, Flying Saucers and the U.S. Air Force. The official Air Force story, it says here. Major Kehoe is our guest this morning, too. Major Donald Kehoe. Do you believe that flying saucers or UFOs, unidentified flying objects, exist, Major?
Yes, I do, Mr. Garraway. We've evaluated evidence in our National Committee in Washington.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I've confused the semantic issue here. I've said both at the same time. Do you believe that flying saucers exist?
Well, I don't like that nickname any more than the Air Force does. I believe that flying objects under intelligent control exist, and that's the belief shared by a majority of our committee in Washington.
Flying objects under intelligent control.
That's right.
Very well. That's the belief of Major Donald Kehoe, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, author of several books and head of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. This book, Colonel Tacker, has occupied me over much of the weekend. It was a very exciting book to read. I've read some of Major Kehoe's books, too. Air Force figures, I believe, show that there have been 6,523 reported sightings over the past 13 years. What percentage of these, according to Air Force standards, remain unexplained?
Well, I'd have to go back to the early days and admit that in the very beginning, when this was a new subject in, say, 47 and 1950, that the unknowns or the unidentified cases ran as high as 20%. By 1953, they were down to 9%, and now they run somewhere between 2 and 3%.
2 and 3%.
Yes, sir.
Major Kehoe, do you agree with that?
No, I don't, because the Air Force has issued a statement, in fact, it's repeated in the Colonel's book here, without any qualifications, that the Air Force has explained all but about 2% of the totals. I have here a letter signed by an official in the Air Force which says that up to the end of 1959, there were 565 cases unexplained, a total of 9.4%, and incidentally, the official was Colonel Lawrence J. Tacker.
That's right. Well, that's what I just said.
I know, but you keep putting out this statement that the Air Force has explained all but so-and-so of the total reported, and it doesn't qualify. It gives people the impression that you have only a dribble left of those cases.
What about that, Colonel?
Well, I think I stated it correctly when you initially asked me, Dave. I said in the early days that they probably ran higher. The investigative techniques one is good. It was a new subject. This is where the science fiction type thing that Major Kehoe writes got started.
May I read a paragraph from the book here? Many sightings by qualified and reliable witnesses have been reported. However, each incident seems to have an unsatisfactory facts associated with it, such as shortness of time under observation. If you saw Marilyn Monroe walking by and you saw her for 1 second, would that be adequate?
I'd probably recognize her.
That's what I mean. Inaccurate estimates of distance from the observer. How is that known that they're inaccurate?
Generally, just by a simple mathematical computation at the Technical Intelligence Center.
How do they know what the distance is?
Well, just based upon the size of the object given,
Well,
they can determine.
but the object isn't given.
It generally is in the report. The
Yeah.
object and the size, the approximate size.
Well, if we don't know what the object is, how can we give the size?
Well, they give the size, as it appeared in the sighting.
Oh, the angular
Yes, sir.
size.
Yes, sir.
Well, that doesn't tell you anything about the distance, does it?
Oh, they can work out distance with that, certainly.
With one sighting of an angular object, like a star, or a planet, or anything?
Yes, sir.
Well, astronomy would like to know that. That's how the Doppler effect. It says lack of photographs. Must a photograph be taken of something?
No, a photograph mustn't be taken, but a photograph is good evidence.
Yes, but the lack of it constitutes unsatisfactory facts.
That's right. Wouldn't it be much better to have one?
And a serious lack of, yes, but not having one, again, if Marilyn Monroe walked by, you might not get to take a picture, but you'd sure know she was there. A serious lack of descriptive data that
I'd sure
prevented
know
definite...
I'd seen something, yeah.
I think you might know what you'd seen, too. A serious lack of descriptive data that prevented definite conclusions from being drawn. Again, if Marilyn Monroe walked by, would you have a serious lack of descriptive data which prevented definite conclusions from being drawn? Do you have to draw conclusions
You're
when you see
kidding,
something?
Dave, aren't you?
Not
Really?
at all, no. When you see something and you describe it, do you have to draw conclusions about it in order for your sight to be valid?
You certainly do.
I don't think so, but there we go. Major Kehoe, let's take you on for a bit now, after we take a station break, if you may, for 2 minutes. We're talking with Senator Colonel Teicher and Major Kehoe on unidentified flying objects. Major, you've maintained for some years now, I believe, that the Air Force is, according to you, deliberately misinforming the public on the subject. How do you support such a serious charge?
We sent a confidential report. When I say confidential, I mean it was confidential to members of Congress in July and since then. And this states a digest of the evidence. Now, in this book, Colonel Teicher says that all the congressmen who talked with the Air Force officers about the subject were completely satisfied with the Air Force answers. I'd like to mention letters. I have all letters here and about 50 more in Washington.
Yeah.
Representative John McCormick, House Majority Leader, says that the House Select Committee, of which he was chairman, tried to get information, was unable to do so, and a number of them were convinced that there were unexplained objects. Representative Joseph Carth said on executive sessions that they tried to get it from the Air Force. The Air Force took refuge in security and said this was involved with the nation's safety.
That's absolutely erroneous. We've never taken refuge in
Are
security.
you calling Representative Carth a liar? Are you calling McCormick
Are you
a liar?
calling General White a liar? Did you read the forward to the book?
Colonel, if I were in your... I read
Have
the
you called Mr. Horner a liar? They made the
I
statement.
don't use the word liar if I can.
You made it. You were the one who brought it up.
All right, now wait a minute. You're trying to keep me from reading the rest of these
I'm
congressional
not trying
names,
to
I
keep
know.
you from doing it.
We have letters here from a number of congressmen who say they are completely and seriously concerned over the secrecy. This report they accepted as proof that these objects were
The worst
real.
bunch of drivel I ever read. That report.
What did you say about the forward, Colonel? It proves what?
I asked what he thought of General White's statement.
No, is that not what I recall that you said? You said in reference to one of those, have you read General White's statement?
Yes, and I asked if he was saying that General White's statement was erroneous.
In regard to what? In regard to what?
In regard to the fact that no spaceships have ever been found.
Oh.
That they don't exist.
That wasn't what we were talking about, I believe.
No, it was not. And I would, if I can, I'd like to finish this. This drivel you talk about was approved by the former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, Vice Admiral Helen Carter, Admiral Knowles, Colonel Emerson, Army Reserve, Major Fournet, a former monitor of your project, and about 200 scientists, engineers, and others, none of whom could be called crackpot types. Now, in here, these people say that they are concerned with it for two reasons. There's a danger involved in the present Air Force policy. You have had
Let me interrupt again and say there is no such policy.
The policy is stated in your book to explain away these. Air Force Regulation 200-2 says...
It's in the book, too.
B9, I know it, B9 says all Air Force activities must reduce the reports to the minimum.
Section 18 says that all information will be given to the public and it won't be classified.
Well, it certainly is not.
Yes,
now,
but
I'd like,
the information given out is that which has been reduced to a minimum according to the same
I would like
directive.
to have your answer on this specific case. This is a key case in Washington, the Washington sighting.
Well, I know that you disagree with the interpretations of some of our findings
Colonel,
in the cases.
if you're going to talk
but
me
the big
down
question,
and not allow me to present evidence, I have a statement in here by you in which you brush off the Washington sightings at the temperature
There's a
inversion.
temperature inversion. That's
Fine.
exactly right.
You stated in there that these things were not picked up by radar at Andrews Air Force Base.
I did not state that.
Oh, yes,
They
you
were
did.
picked up by radar.
I beg your pardon. It's
Oh,
in
at
the
Andrews
book.
Air Force Base.
That's
You're
right.
correct. All right,
That's
you're
I am
correct.
correct.
They were on the radar at the National Airport.
I have here a signed report by an Air Force weather observer, radar expert who was in the tower. Describes picking up these blips. So
We don't consider those people experts. I have 4,000 hours on radar scopes.
That's all right. There are a lot of people that are expert on radar because that's their livelihood. They guide airliners into the airports. If they're no good, if your air defense people are no good on radar, how are they going to tell us about Soviet bombers? Let me get to this. This person said that they were picked up on the blips, on the radar. They had a group of them. They came in formation. They split up. They operated at speeds over 900 miles an hour. Now, you deny flatly.
Apparently, right.
At Washington Airport, the experts on radar track these things at speeds up to 7,200 miles an hour.
A radar operator is not an expert, Major
All right.
Kehoe.
Is a weather
He's an
bureau observer?
operator, just like the man that uses these...
I have to interrupt, gentlemen, to do two things, unhappily. Exactly how long do we have? 30 seconds to the thing. Well, I have to interrupt because we've run out of time. I suggest everybody read this and find out for yourself what you think of it. I find such exciting facts in here, some I believe to be exactly right and some I believe to be exactly wrong because they're self-contradictory, some of them, that I'd like to know more about it.
All right, Dave.
Reread it and talk to you about it further.
Right, sir.
So find out more about these things and see what you think of them. Colonel Tacker's book is the official Air Force story. Station break right now. But what he says essentially is that unidentified flying objects are investigated. So far, not a single bit of material evidence of the existence of spaceships has been found. Well, you have to...
What he ties in there, Dave, is the fact that by an act of Congress, the United States Air Force is charged with the air defense of the United States.
Right.
And you can't separate UFOs from our air defense mission.
No,
you can't possibly do it. We're charged with it, therefore we go up. We scramble at times based on these things.
But must material evidence of the existence of something be found before it's real?
Certainly, I believe so. I don't think you have anything.
Did you ever have a piece of the moon in your hand?
No.
Is it real?
Oh, I'd say it was, yeah. But then you have spectrum analysis of light that they've taken. You've got... I'm not a scientist. I'm an information officer and a reporter.
Sure. I'm a reporter.
But there are such things as photographs and spectrum analysis and mathematical counts that they can build up to a basis and come up with a pure scientific answer, not a vague statement by somebody that, sure, spaceships exist. I believe it is an act of faith. And, of course, that's all right if they believe it is an act of faith. What I object to is this countless harangue that the Air Force is withholding information. This is ridiculous.
Well, just saying it's ridiculous won't prove it one way or the other, will it?
Yes, it will. Oh, you mean my saying it's ridiculous? No, but I can prove it. That we haven't withheld information.
You can't prove it because we have cases you have withheld. And if you have the top...
You mean you have cases we have withheld? I'm talking about the general
I'm
public.
talking about NICAP.
What is NICAP?
NICAP
It's a
is
UFO hobby group.
Oh, I know what's that. Are you saying that Hill and Carter, top admiral, we've got high Air Force officers, Colonel Joseph Bryan, Air Force Reserve, Colonel Mackensen, Air Force
You're
Reserve, William
impressing
Lee.
me immensely, Major.
I'm not trying to impress you. Matter of fact, if you keep your temper, we might get down to some facts here.
I have no temper here. I just feel concerned and believe my side
I will
of the
make you an
story.
offer. I will agree to appear with you in public and disclose what we don't have time to put on here. If you can prove that what you say is true, I will resign as director of NICAP. I will recommend to Admiral Hill and Carter that we disband. I will tell them to
I will
close
do
this
that
book
if you
of
bring
mine
this
off.
evidence up
I will
proves the
hold-
existence of
Hold it.
spaceships.
We've just taken out 10 minutes of the show. Later on, we can come back for 10 more minutes. Right now, we're going to take the news, all right?
Sure.
And I think if we keep you apart for those intervening 15 minutes, it might be wise.
No problem, Dave. No problem.
No problem.
I'm enjoying it.
So am I. I hope Major Keogh is. I hope you are, too.
WRC-TV, Washington.
The switchboards are loaded with calls about our discussion of flying saucers and the U.S. Air Force here. The new book out by Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence J. Tacker, United States Air Force. We've been discussing it with Major Donald Kehoe, who is head of one of the several groups on who believe in flying objects, I believe, flying saucers or spaceships. Let's continue, and let's talk about facts now as best we can. Colonel White, we discussed that one. I'll take another fact. The astronomy information given in here, as straight astronomy information in the chapter, It's Easy to Be Fooled, where you say many things are really astronomical objects, is interesting to me because I've been fooling around with it for several years, like 27, I think.
Well, you must be fairly familiar with
Well,
it. Again, keep in mind I was reporting. I got this from the scientific people.
But it's in the book and to be taken, therefore, as right.
Good.
When an aircraft, you're speaking about the planet Venus now, as the aircraft moves through the atmosphere at an advanced speed, its position relative to the object naturally changes. Does the object, therefore, change its position, apparently?
The aircraft changes its position.
10 miles out of 80 million, perhaps.
Oh, I see. You mean it would be infinitesimal.
Well, no matter where you fly on the Earth, Venus will be almost exactly the same place.
You're right. You're correct.
There are about a dozen of those that I would like to bring up, but I want to introduce Major Kehoe.
Well,
And you
you have to
back to the
remember
program.
the azimuth of the body does keep changing.
Not the apparent azimuth of the planet. That remains the same.
But the azimuth of the body, based on the true heading of the aircraft, keeps changing. I believe that's what they
Not
mean.
measurably.
Oh, measurably, Dave. It changes all the time with the celestial tables. When I shoot the stars or the
Oh, you
the
mean the
sun,
rotation of the
that's
Earth?
right, right.
Well, not in any period that you, when the aircraft moves through the atmosphere, you say the object appears to be moving. It doesn't appear to be moving. The sun doesn't appear to move in the sky.
No, it's the heading of the aircraft is what they mean there. That the actual azimuth of the body keeps changing.
Oh, if you turn
with
the
respect-
aircraft around,
Right,
yeah.
right. That's what I believe they mean.
I see. Major, you have something you want to say.
Well, I wanted to say that the whole thing rests on the weight of evidence. Now, we have gone into all the reports which the Air Force has released, and in 52 and 53, they were releasing quite a lot of cases to me. This board of advisors that we have includes some of the top scientists in the country. Incidentally, Colonel, you mentioned Dr. Olivier and the American Meteor Society. It might interest you to know the American Meteor Society is a member of NICAP, and so is Dr. Olivier. He does not agree with the Air Force stand and the secrecy. You also mentioned Dr. Carl J. Jung, the
Right.
famous analyst. You imply there that he thinks everybody's crackpots. Dr. Jung is also a member of NICAP. I have 2 letters here from him in which he says, I have no doubt that these things may be real. It seems this last book, he's referring to my last book, said that seems to prove that they are real, and he says the Air Force policy is stupid and unpsychological because it will create panic more than it will help it.
If they are withholding information.
They are withholding
They are not
information.
withholding information.
Well, according to all the congressmen that I have talked with recently about this, they say the Air Force is. Now, in 1957, we asked you for a number of cases. You didn't even have the courtesy to reply to those cases, and 2 or 3 of them are very hot ones. But since we're short of time, I'd like to
you
ask
everything
you
you
this.
asked for.
Only you haven't.
Yes, I have.
I asked you for the inside of the Captain Ryan case, where you people sent an airliner to chase one of these objects, and the case of the F-80.
We never sent an airliner to chase one
I
of these
have the
objects.
tape, the transcript. It's in Senator
You
Mulroney's
said you
office.
had it. I've never seen it. I never heard it.
Anytime you care to hear it, and I have the transcript here, I'll give you a copy of it.
All right.
He stated they were ordered to chase. They left the course with passengers and chased this thing for 100 miles. All of this evidence has impressed enough people. Now, I would say you might question Senator Barry Goldwater, who was a brigadier general in
The
your
United
Air Force
States Air
Reserve.
Force, right.
He said, I had lunch with him about 2 or 3 years ago. He said he was convinced that this thing was real. He has stated so later in the newspapers. He didn't say what they were, but they were real, and he says the Air Force clams up. Now, you can't disagree with a man who's both a senator and brigadier general.
I checked that
Senator,
statement
wait a
out. You
minute.
made that on the last, you made that very point on the last program you were on with Dave Garraway, and I checked that out with his office, and they have no record of
yes,
such a
they have.
statement.
Oh, yes,
No,
they
they don't.
Well, I'll show you the record. Anytime
right.
you care to come up to our office,
That's
we'll
what
give
I
it
mean.
to
You keep talking about the record, and you keep talking about
realize
the
that-
evidence.
Well, we're all
Well, let's
talking
don't get
about
back to
on television,
personality.
we can't project evidence through the machine
No.
unless it's a visible object, and there are no
No.
tangible
Well,
objects here.
there's
Agreed.
one more person I'd like to mention, and that's President-elect Kennedy. About a year ago, he wrote to one of our members and called this an important topic. Now, would you say that he was one of the deluded?
I think it's a real important topic, and I want to stress right now that the Air Force doesn't deny the possibility of these things. It simply states that to date, there is no evidence to come up with a sensational claim that there are extraterrestrial vehicles in our atmosphere.
In 1948, and you have denied that document exists, that in 1948 there was a top secret estimate that these things were interplanetary. Now, that was stated first by Captain
I've
Ruppel.
never seen or heard of it.
Captain Ruppel, head of the project, stated it. He said it was a black document stamped top secret on the cover, and it said that. It wasn't any just opinion. Later, we checked with Major Dewey Fournay, who was the monitor of the project at that time and is now on our board. I have a letter, which I'll show you later, in which he says, I'm hereby confirming the existence of two documents the Air Force has denied. One of them is a 1948 estimate, and the other is his own 1952 conclusion, which you also have kept under wraps.
If it's his conclusion,
No,
it's not ATIC's or the Air Force's, and I can say right now there's no such Air
May I
Force
ask a
conclusion.
question here?
Yeah.
Sure, Dave.
Sir, could you afford to say in your official position that there would be such a document if it were secret?
Could I say?
If such a document did exist and it were stamped top secret or secret, could you admit the existence of it as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force?
I doubt it. But having a top secret clearance and having gone through all the documents, there is no such document.
Or you just said that you doubt if you could say so?
No, I can say there isn't one.
It was burned, declassified and burned, according to Ruppel. Fournay says the same
Well,
thing.
I just mean this generally. Can an officer admit the existence of any top secret document about
Yes, you can, and you can say you're in a classified area, and then, of course, it's off. But
Well-
this situation doesn't exist with UFOs.
Well, then we have to take that statement in view of the statement you just made, I think.
That there is no such document. That's right.
And that an officer can state such a fact if it exists.
That's right.
Very well. That's the question I wanted to ask, Major. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Well, I don't want to box you in here.
No, go ahead.
Two of you.
Go ahead.
Will you defend this book, please, because we're attacking it, apparently. Why is the Air Force so... why did you write an official book about this subject?
I felt the book had to be written because I felt the Air Force was being set upon by Major Kehoe, by NICAP, by the other UFO hobby groups who believe
We're not a
in
hobby group.
spaceships as a act of pure faith. I felt that I had to do it because of these senseless accusations against the Air Force. In line with that, let me for a minute show you that when the Air Force does investigate a flying saucer, it has at its disposal the resources of the Air Research and Development Command, the resources of the Air Materiel Command, the National Space Surveillance Center, and Hanscom Field in Bedford, Massachusetts, which can tell you now on the first orbit if Russia or anybody else has something up. We have all the university laboratories at our disposal. We have all the weather stations. We have countless radar stations. We have instantaneous communications with Fairbanks, Alaska, Wiesbaden, Germany, Japan, any place we want. And when I compare this to what your equipment probably is, a typewriter and some stationery, it doesn't add up very well. I think it's ridiculous.
May I answer that, Mr. Garraway?
Yes, sir.
Our equipment includes about 200 men, including top astronomers, missile trackers, for instance, Captain McLaughlin, United States Navy. Professor Herman Oberth, one of the great rocket experts. I could name as many as you wished, and we could cover every field involved in space travel planning. Our equipment is material which we take and hand over to these experts and sometimes outside scientists and
Where do you
evaluate.
get it from? The newspapers?
We get it from confidential reports given to us by some of your own Air Force people. And
Is
I
that
think,
a fact?
yes, that's a fact. These things will be certified. Well, we had one on Oxford Air Force Base in 1957. The Air Force denied that it happened. The CAA radar operator said they tracked this object at 3,600 miles an hour over Oxnard Air Force Base. But what it boils down to is you're under orders to deny that.
That is not so.
Well, you have to. Your job
that is
is
not
such.
so.
If I were in your shoes, I would have to do exactly what you're doing.
You don't know anything about my job.
Colonel, I'm going to ask you to explain one case here. Last August, at Red Bluff, California, 2 state troopers reported that they were sighting an object which at one time hovered 500 feet above their patrol car. It cut out their radio. It swept the ground with the red light. They pointed their own red light up, and this object immediately climbed at high speed. Air Force radar Red Bluff said they were tracking the object. They told the San Francisco Chronicle and other papers.
Air Force radar at Red Bluff
Wait a
did
minute.
not track it, and they made the statement that they had nothing on the scope.
They told the newspapers.
I read this report
All
yesterday.
right, now wait a minute, I'm not finished. We asked you about this. One of our members asked, and then we asked. You stated that these people had been misled by seeing the planet Mars, the
Exactly.
star Aldebaran, and the star Betelgeuse. Now, wait
Exactly.
a minute. We checked with the Hayden Planetarium in Boston and other astronomers. They projected this on the heavens. Mars did not rise for an hour afterwards. Aldebaran did not rise for 2 hours. Betelgeuse was 3 hours below the
Don't
horizon.
you understand what happened?
I understand
There was a
perfectly. You had to
temperature
cover it up.
inversion for 6 days. Do you know what a temperature inversion does?
I know exactly
it
what they
causes
are.
refraction and a mirage above the horizon.
How much refraction?
It
Not
bends
for 3 hours.
the light
It doesn't
rays.
pick up a star 3 hours. from
Mars
light.
was just below the horizon. I'm
You're
not going to
putting-
argue
you're
with
put-
you. I'm giving you what our scientific
putting your-
community told me.
You're putting your word against
That's that.
astronomers who are every day working out problems like that. I have a
I'm
sketch here
using the
showing
word of
these things.
astronomers that work for the United States Air Force, sir.
Under contract and under orders to try to explain these away until you're ready to answer.
That's ridiculous. Why don't
Well,
you get off
gentlemen.
that kick? You don't believe it yourself.
Well, Colonel, I'm not
I
going
must-
to indulge in personalities with you, but I will repeat my offer.
We
If
have to
you
take
will-
a station break here. No, we have to leave you. I don't know where we are. I wasn't very much interested in flying saucers, but I read your book. Now I'm fascinated
Good, sir.
because there's such an area of controversy here. Shall I say peace?
Muito interessante essas entrevistas. Em breve a gente vai estar trazendo uma outra entrevista que nós obtivemos também, bem legal, e aguarde aí, nos acompanhe aí nas redes sociais, continue prestigiando o nosso canal. Se você não é inscrito, se inscreva no nosso canal, porque a gente está numa campanha aí rumo aos 50 mil inscritos e nós dependemos da sua colaboração aí para estar se inscrevendo e compartilhando esse vídeo com seus amigos, com seus parentes. Então, até o próximo programa com o Edson Boaventura Júnior.